right, what's good, everybody? It's Luther Wilson III on another real estate session where I talk about real estate investing, real estate sales, creative financing, all that good stuff. All right, as a lot of you know, I'm a real estate professional here in the Kansas City market. And in today's video, I want to talk about seller finance fundamentals. Okay, seller finance fundamentals, seller finance, okay, installment agreements, and lease purchases I want to talk about. All right, and you can look back at some of my previous videos where I dig in to different topics, and you know, I'll be doing more in the future, hopefully, so stay tuned there. But I want to go over some of the basics of seller finance transactions, how we structure them, and how you might be able to partake, whether you're looking to buy or sell using or creating some type of seller finance note or transaction. Okay, so the main seller finance transaction types that I've done over the last handful of years have been installment agreements. And installment agreements, there's four main types that I'm aware of, okay, when it comes to real estate, when it comes to mortgages. All right, you got true owner financing, okay, you have existing financing, all right, you have wraparound mortgages, okay, and then the fourth, you have contract for deeds, which there's different names that are used for each one, okay? So on the true seller financing, sometimes we refer to those as true seller carrybacks. On the existing financing, those are often referred to as subject twos or subject to the existing financing, okay? And then the wraparound mortgages are essentially, you know, it could be an underlying debt. There's usually some kind of underlying debt, hence the name wraparound, okay? And then for the contract for deeds, other, you know, terms for that is agreement for sale or land contract, okay? So that has been what me and, you know, my team, my colleagues have done the most of over the last, actually it's been more than 5 years. I did my first, you know, seller finance contract for deed transaction in 2011, but it's really picked up over the last 3, 4, 5 years as the market has changed and more investors are looking at alternate ways of creating cash flow and doing transactions and so forth, all right? So talked about installment agreements, the four main types. I want to get into lease purchases a little bit because I think that's a huge play right now and going forward. And I think of two ways that you could do a lease purchase. You got lease with an option, or you have some type of rent to own, okay? And you got to determine, okay, based on the particular property, the financing, if there's any underlying debt, and what your intention is, what your goal is as far as purchasing or selling when you're looking at doing an installment agreement or some type of lease purchase or resale, okay? You gotta determine, right, you know, and based on who you're buying from or who you're selling to, who's buying from you rather, in that situation on that property and so forth, that will help you determine how to structure it, how to handle it, and so forth, okay? And some of you know, I grew up in the real estate business. My mom's a realtor, my dad's a longtime investor, and that's who I learned a lot of this stuff from, is from my pops. He and his partners and colleagues were doing subject to transactions and lease options and contract for deeds in the very late 80s and early 90s, all the way through the 2000s and up through today. And so as I grew up, you know, seeing how my parents operate, I would pick up things here and there. And I remember my first experience with an installment agreement. I think it was my first year of college. I had gotten some money from my pops. I think it was to do some car repairs because I had an old vehicle that was handed down and from my grandfather, and it, you know, was something was always going on with it. In it was my last year of high school when I first got it, and then I drove it all the way through college. And I had gotten some money from my pops. I'm pretty sure it was my first year of college. I don't remember the amount, but he put me on a payment plan, and I didn't realize later on that that was a form of an installment agreement. Okay, and you know, I quickly realized that that was not a gift. It was not an allowance. That was a loan. Okay, and so I had to pay it back, and he, you know, put a piece of paper in my mail slot here at their house, and it had each month how much I could pay. And then he was generous enough not to charge interest on me, which was cool. But I thought it was unique and pretty cool looking back. That was my first experience with an installment agreement. And so you can do this type of thing not only with real property, real estate, you can do it with vehicles, of course. You might even do it with a business or clothing or you name it. You could do these types of transactions for real property, chattel, and so forth. All right. And so why you might want to look at doing creative transactions of some sort. Investors, I know a ton of investors who own rental properties, or they're doing renovation and resale, fix and flip projects. And they get to a certain point, however long it takes, and they start realizing, hey, there's other ways that I can generate revenue and cash flow via real estate. I don't necessarily have to be the one that even owns it. So you can look at loaning money, and you can look at offering seller financing and doing creative stuff. So I've been able to help more investors the last few years than I ever have do seller finance transactions of some sort. And I think the biggest reason, and I was talking with my dad just a few minutes ago about this, the biggest reason that a lot of landlords or real estate investors end up looking at and doing seller financing is for relief, because it's a lot of work to purchase, renovate, resell. If you're keeping properties, you're dealing with the tenants and the maintenance and contractors and so forth. It's nonstop. And then you have to deal with the financing and the funding, whether it's short-term debt or long-term debt, and so on. All right, the stuff that I talk about in some of my previous videos. And so for a lot of landlords and contractors and rehabbers, they want relief. Okay, and so we end up looking at seller financing as a way to continue to receive cash flow each month without having to spend as much time or money or energy or resources or whatever dealing with the grind of the renovation and the maintenance and the rent collection and the default situations and the clean outs and the evictions and doing the whole sheriff thing and dealing with the attorneys. And then it's a business, it's a whole business. And so that's where we see a big opportunity for investors to be able to create some more time freedom, help their bottom line, cash flow, and so forth. So that's a huge thing for you to consider. And I brought notes again, and I want to make sure I go over everything that I wanted to go over. Okay, so when it comes to the seller financing, these a lot of times are private loans, they're private mortgages, or they're private notes that get created, okay? And so as we have done a number of note creation, a number of transactions, there's a whole like subset of investors called note investors. And you can buy and sell notes, you can trade them. Once you've done some type of seller finance transaction, more often than not, it's going to be an installment agreement. You have a note, or which is also considered paper. There's a term called paper in that industry or in that type of, environment. And you can buy and sell paper, you can trade the paper, okay? And then you can also invest into paper, right? That's already been created. You could do outright purchases of a note. You could do partial purchases of a note. And then, we could get into all kinds of stuff. I talk about private equity, private capital, and so forth. So there's a lot that you could do with the creative financing, but I want to focus mostly on seller financing. You know, it's usually who we work with are investors who own property. It works very well with single family homes, okay? And we're offering home ownership to residents who are planning to buy from us. They're living in the home, they're planning to stay there for a very long time. I tell investors, they want to rock with me and do this, you got to be prepared to invest for 10 plus years. It may be shorter, it could very well be longer. So it's truly a long-term investment, and it goes back to, you know, determining which type of seller finance transaction that you want to offer based on, again, your intentions, your goals, your vision, and then how you want to operate your business, the underlying debt, the type of financing that's involved, okay, who's involved is going to help you determine how you may want to go forward, okay? If you have purchased a property and it's off market and you've done the renovation and then you're looking at doing a refi, okay, and then you want to do seller financing to a family or an individual, residents, whoever, you got to figure out, okay, we got to look at getting the refi done, of course, and then, okay, if we're going to do a lease option, right, or if we're going to do a contract for deed, those are the two main things that we're looking at and doing right now. You got to look at the pros and cons, okay? There's tax implications, right? There's documentation. These things have to be structured and handled a certain way, okay? So pros and cons, right? If we're looking at doing the contract for deed, that's been most of my transactions over the last 5 years. I've done about 40 of them, most of which have been me assisting or representing a client, an investor client of mine. A lot of those have not been mine. I'm a licensed real estate broker in Kansas City, Missouri. Upside Property Services, hit me up. Okay, so of those 40, most of those have been contract for deeds. Some of those, a handful of those, were true seller carrybacks, which the investor or seller deeded the property over to the purchasers, okay? And there are pros and cons to that, right? We gotta make sure that the underlying debt is clean. And, you know, if you're gonna do a contract for deed, most of ours are 15 to 30 years long. They're fully amortized, okay? There's no balloon. We don't do adjustable rate mortgages, and we do not do balloons, okay, for our residents, okay? You got to be mindful of that. Okay, so these are long-term investments. So if you are working with a lender and you have private capital and the underlying debt, whether it's in first lien position or second lien position, has to be paid off within 6 months to a year, or perhaps within 3 years, it's going to affect the long-term investment. The installment agreement that you're doing for 15 to 30 years could be negatively affected. So you got to make sure that the underlying debt and the funding is straight if you're looking at doing an installment agreement of some sort, okay? And then when we do our seller finance transactions and we're doing an installment agreement, the main things that we look at, of course, and this is based on the location, the condition, the size of the home, and so forth. We're looking at purchase price, we're looking at down payment, we're looking at interest rate, okay? We're looking at length of the note or length of the loan, and then we got to look at the escrow for the yearly taxes and insurance. That's going to be broken down by month. And then we can put that into an amortization calculator or a mortgage calculator to then determine on that agreement for sale or contract for deed or land contract or true seller carryback, however you want to swing it, what that monthly payment is going to be. Principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, PITI. That's the installment agreement. So based on your underlying debt, your underlying situation with your lender and partner and whoever, that'll then help determine how you could structure your seller finance transaction if you are wanting to do an installment agreement of some sort. Cool thing about an installment agreement, we're usually able to get, you know, market value maybe 5 to 10% more than the current value or current appraisal amount, okay? And we can get large down payments. 10% down, 15% down, sometimes more. The average, I'll need to recalculate it, but the average down payment that I've been able to help my clients and my partners get over the last 5 years, okay, I haven't added the last 2 or 3, but prior to that, the average down payment that we were able to get was $22,000 and some change. That's pretty sweet, right? You do a seller finance transaction, right? And you get, $20,000 to $30,000 down. You're walking away with somewhere between $12,000 and $20,000 at closing. And then the residents are going to pay you each month for the next 10, 20, 30 years until they sell the property, until they refinance, right? Or until they pay you off, however that looks. So again, you gotta talk with some people who've done this. We're in the Kansas City market, so based on wherever you are, if you can find some seasoned professionals and some advisors who've been in this type of scenario, that's gonna help you tremendously. If you're in Kansas City or looking in Kansas City, hit me up. We've talked to multiple attorneys, we've talked to multiple CPAs, and we've talked to multiple investors who are doing this type of thing and have notes and so forth today to figure out, okay, what is this gonna look like? What's the cash flow look like? On that example that I gave, where you may get $20,000 down and walk away from closing with 12 grand, you may only cash flow $100 a month. You may cash flow $300 a month, but again, it depends on your underlying debt. If you refinance or if you buy a property today and you as an investor have a 75% LTV loan at 8% or 7.5% interest, that's going to help you then determine how your installment agreement resale is going to look like on the back end. So if we're paying 7.5, we may be able to get 9%, okay, maybe higher from our contract for deed buyer. We get the $1,000 down, you get your 12 grand walk away money, but you got to look at the numbers, right? If the appraisal amount is 180 and your underlying debt is 135, maybe less, then okay, we know on a contract for deed that we might be able to sell for 180 or 200 and get 20,000 down. You got to be mindful of the spreads, how much you owe, how much your buyer is going to owe you, the interest rate arbitrage. The cash flow isn't really that great on a lot of these. My average cash flow on the ones that I have going right now is $300 to $400 a month. The cool thing about it is the relief. I was a property manager for years. I still help investors with all kinds of stuff, all right? So the relief was huge for me. $100 a month, $200 a month, I'll split that with a partner. Of course we want more, but to be able to walk away from closing with 5 figures and not have to deal with a maintenance call or having to hire a contractor to fix anything at that property for the next 5 to 10 plus years potentially, that's an absolute game changer for me, right? So you got to, look at how you operate. If you're cool managing properties and you can do that in-house, and you got a good third-party property manager, and you want to really do the long-term investment, because that's really what it is. For the rentals, it's a long-term play, and it's really not that great during the holding period. You got to just figure it out, right? And it's a great play. I plan on doing more of it, mostly with multifamily. If I have a house, I'm not renting it out. There'll be a slim chance that I rent that house out. If I have an investment property, a single family home, you might have to fight me to get you to rent that, for me to rent that house to you, because I'm looking at doing one of the 6 things that I've just mentioned as far as creative financing, and have somebody's thrilled to be able to buy a home from me, okay? And I don't have to, I think you get the idea, all right? So you have to determine how you want to move. And then we cannot forget about our silent partner, Uncle Sam, because on these installment agreements, it's a resale. You're selling the property on a note. There's a private mortgage that gets created, that note, that paper that I mentioned earlier. So there's tax implications to that. So you want to talk to your, advisors and figure out what's that going to look like if you're doing real estate full time and you have other assets, and you may have some rentals and you're doing other things as an entrepreneur. the write-offs may still be solid, but you have to talk with some people to figure out what that's going to look like, okay? Because you're not going to necessarily be able to get as much depreciation over time when you're doing the installment agreement resale, which leads me to my next point. If you're going to do lease options or some type of rent to own, you can still get some of the good, juicy stuff from the installment agreement type of transaction, right? You can look at doing a lease option. Here, when, I mentioned the things that we look at on the installment agreements: purchase price, down payment, interest rate, length of the note, okay? And then the escrow each month for the taxes and insurance. And then on that, I need to make one other point. Who gets the deed, right? Are you going to keep the deed the entire time? Or are you going to deed that property over to your residents, the people who are purchasing that home from you on that note? You got to decide. Tax implications for that. Just know this: whoever is on deed as owner of record is going to get the tax bill and the insurance bill each year. So you got to sort through that. Okay. Lease option, right? I mentioned the things that we look at for the installment agreement: purchase price, down payment, interest rate, length of the note, escrow, PITI, monthly, right? Lease option, we're going to look at upfront money. It's an option fee. It's not a down payment. It's not a deposit. It's an option fee. Since it's a lease and an option, there's two separate agreements. So you got the upfront money, which is the option fee. You're going to have a security deposit, and you're going to need to do first month's rent, having that in or documented somehow. Then from there, you got to determine how long you're going to give these residents before they need to exercise their option, okay? From what I've been taught, how I'm looking to do going forward, I'm giving them 10 years. So there's no question whether it's fair, legal, moral, ethical, all that good stuff, right? And they have plenty of time to figure out their finances. And then as time goes on, you can decide if they've paid well or have been good stewards or have treated you well, to determine, okay, if they want to exercise it early and the amount that we agreed to on the option is less than the appraisal amount, are you going to rock with them? Or if they go past the 10-year mark and they haven't been able to exercise their option yet, do you want to renew? Or do you maybe want to convert them to an installment agreement? Or do you want to do something different? You got to decide based on that business relationship that you have with the residents, with the home buyers who've been in the home, paying you like clockwork, taking care of the property, right? That's a beautiful thing. So on the lease option, you got upfront money, option fee, security deposit, first month's rent. Okay, we're going to be getting more each month for that rent than we would on a long-term rental, or more each month than we would on an installment agreement, PITI. And then on the back end, right, if you have, okay, the example that I use, and you can look on my LinkedIn and my Facebook business page and my personal page and my Instagram for a bunch of examples. In and around Kansas City, B-class single family homes, $200,000. Buy that home today, you do a lease option, you get however much up front. We're looking at getting a boost in the monthly rent, at least $100, $200 a month more than what we could get market rent. And then 10 years out, that $200,000 home today, we're going to use $300,000 as the amount that the residents will need to pay or qualify for to exercise their purchase option. And guess what? When that happens, whether it's at year 3 or 5 or 7 or maybe even year 12, you're walking away with a large back-end payout, right? All along the way, you've received more cash flow, right? And you're freed up because in that lease agreement, they are responsible for the upkeep and the maintenance. You can do that, right? And again, get with your advisors, talk with your people, get with folks who are doing it and have done it at some point or another to figure out how to document this stuff, how to structure it, how to handle it, the tax implications, okay? On the lease option, you'll probably make a lot more money, okay? And you'll be able to get a lot more tax benefits, more depreciation for sure. And on the back end, you get the huge payout as part of that. So the thing, I think a big thing for investors, and I mentioned it on one of my previous videos, and I talk about it regularly on social media, is investors getting a handle on the funding and the financing part. That's huge on the front end. That way we know how we can then go invest, right? The key part with, one of the biggest things that we see, one of the biggest things that I look at, the conversations that I have with investors and I think about over and over again is, okay, cool. Installment agreement, I know I can get more upfront, larger down payment or large down payment. That's great, because when I go over budget and past the deadline on my renovation project and I have to come out of pocket to get the refinance done to pay off the private money lender and the hard money lender, okay, if I get $30,000 down, I may be able to recoup all of that, if not most of it or some of it. That's a huge thing that investors are facing right now is, again, the strategy, the capital, the operations, okay? But we're gonna have to pay for that later on, somehow, some way, right? It's gonna maybe less cash flow and more to our silent partner, Uncle Sam, later on down the road, okay? So the lease option is super attractive because over time, it's gonna make more, right? But the drawdown is, okay, we may not be able to get $20,000 to $30,000 or $60,000 down like we have on an installment agreement contract for deed, like we would for a lease option. We may be looking at 5 to 10, maybe 10 to 15 as upfront money. That's option fee, security deposit, first month's rent. So if our all-in amount, depending on our strategy and the capital and the operations, our all-in amount, right? How much money we have left in that deal and how much we are willing and capable of leaving in that deal, right? That's sacrifice we got to make. I got deals right now where me and a partner have, almost $50,000, $60,000 tied up in that investment. Fortunately for us, we did a 30-year contract for deed and we got $15,000 down, walked away with $9,000 to help recoup some of that, but we got a way to get paid. It is what it is. So again, I want to focus on seller finance fundamentals, installment agreements, lease purchases, because I could get carried away and talk about a million other things, but that's the purpose of this video, is to help illuminate some things and get investors and property owners to see that there are alternate ways of creating cash flow revenue for your business and growing your wealth and, whatever lifestyle you want to live. Okay, so hit me up if you want to learn more about some of the opportunities that we're seeing in and around Kansas City, or if you want to learn more about how you can make it in whatever market you're investing in. Be happy to talk shop with you, do a Zoom call, coffee, barbecue, whatever. Hit me up and we can kind of talk over the process and see what makes sense for you. Because, the funding, the underlying debt, again, and then how long you're able and willing to leave money tied up in that investment. We're looking at treating these real estate investments as true investments where we put the money in and we actually leave it invested for the next 5 to 10 plus years, and not necessarily having to put ourselves under boatloads of pressure doing renovations and refis, dealing with contractors, property management, maintenance, and so forth. All that can work, has worked very well, will continue to work. But again, you got to determine how much you want to work, how hard you want to go. We can focus at looking at deals and getting creative, or we could look at raising capital and having a really good business model. Okay, sign me up for that. That's all I got for today. Appreciate you tuning in. See you next time. Peace.